Hi everybody, welcome back to Digital ELA LOT. It's Aisha again, and today we're going to be reading a nonfiction passage called Ruins of a Fabled City. We're going to be reading the passage, going over detail questions and how to approach them on the SHSAT, and talking a little bit about difficult vocabulary we might find on the test and what to do when we're stuck on a word. As usual, watch today's video, take notes, and then try the link in the description where you'll find the worksheet. Once you do that worksheet, watch the second video, which Alexa's in, and she's going to go over all the questions and the answers. Let's just get into it. So there are two types of detail questions on this test. The first is explicit detail questions, which ask you about evidence quoted directly from the text, and the other is implicit detail questions, which ask you about evidence paraphrased from the text. Both types of questions are going to be asking you to identify the detail from a text that supports a fact, claim, or an argument. So in order to approach these questions and just be able to do them, there are two things that we should do as we read. First is to keep track of the main ideas of each paragraph and the passage. In case you guys haven't noticed, this is a general theme. This is something that we should do during the SHSAT, no matter what question we're prepared for. Second, we need to underline key details as we read. In order to identify what details we should underline, which ones are key, we use the acronym REX. If you don't know this one, write it down. R is for repetition, E and C is for effect and cause, and S is for statistics, but in not science or math-related passages, use that just to remember numbers in general, because those are typically pretty important. Now, before we move on to putting these two strategies in place and reading the passage, we're going to talk a little bit about vocabulary. So, like in real life, when you take the SHSAT, you're going to find words that you don't know. The difference is, on the SHSAT, you can't look at a dictionary, you can't Google it, you can't ask a teacher what a word means. So we need to come up with an alternative strategy. This is not a strategy you should use in your day-to-day life. In general, if you don't know what a word means, especially when you're reading or learning in school, it's really, really important that you figure out that you ask what the actual definition is and what other uses of the word is. If you don't do so, you could lose a really valuable part of whatever you're learning. So on the SHSAT, they put a lot of complicated vocabulary that most people don't know to throw you off. You're only going to go back and figure out what a word means if it's repeated in the text, because that means it's important, just like with details, or if it's an important part of the question. When you do that on the SHSAT, when you find a word that you need to find a definition for, there are two steps. First is to identify the part of speech, so the function of what the word is. We've gone over that: noun, verb, adjective, adverb. And then after you do that, you use context clues in the sentences around them to come up with your own definition. Now, I said it before, but I'm going to say it again. This definition is not something that you need to rely on or that you should at all rely on when you're reading or when you're in class or in general when you just encounter a word that you don't know. This will only work for the test, and the only reason we're teaching you guys this is because we do want to prepare you for this test and explain to you how to work around words that you don't know. This is not a strategy to use outside of the test. This is just for that. So we're going to practice this on these sentences right here. They're a little bit easier than what you're going to find on the test, but it's just a good idea to get a sense of what these steps look like in action. So the sentences are: Alexa speaks Spanish, English, and she's learning Italian. She wants to learn a lot of languages. She wants to be a polyglot someday. So we know from those sentences, we know from the last one, polyglot, that it is a noun because she wants to be a person, place, or thing. That means a noun. From the two sentences before that, we can figure out that polyglot means someone who speaks a lot of languages. That is a very simple way that we would use those two steps to come up with definitions for words that we don't know on the test. Again, only use this on the test. You're going to be losing a lot of valuable experiences to learn and just a lot of important information if you use this outside of the test. Okay, so now we're going to get into the first paragraph of the text and to go over the details and maybe use this strategy to come up with definitions for words we don't know if they come up. The African country of Zimbabwe took its name from the Shona word meaning stone enclosures or venerated houses. In fact, today dozens of stone ruins are scattered throughout Zimbabwe and other areas in southeastern Africa. One of these ruins, known as Great Zimbabwe, was once a fabled city that inspired tales that circulated throughout Europe. Where was this remarkable city, and who had built it? For centuries, the mystery occupied the minds of explorers and treasure seekers. So there are words in here that I don't know, that you guys probably don't know. But since none of them were repeated, I don't think it's worth trying to figure any of them out. If you really want to, you can pause and look it up, but if you're working with me, we're not going to go over them. For annotating, we're going to start with the main idea for this paragraph. You can write your own, but my main idea, the one that I wrote, is Great Zimbabwe, which is now in stone ruins, was once a city in southeastern Africa that many Europeans were interested in. It's kind of a long main idea. You can write yours a little bit shorter if you wanted. Now for underlining details, we're going to go back to the REX acronym. There aren't many details in this paragraph that meet the requirement because this is the first paragraph, this is the introduction, and they usually don't get to the details until the middle. The one that I am going to underline is the fact that this is a city made of stone because it's mentioned twice. I'm just going to underline it the second time that it's mentioned. Oh, right. That's Rex, in case you guys forgot. So I forgot to put it on the screen, but what I'm underlining is the words. In fact, today, dozens of stone ruins are scattered throughout Zimbabwe because that's the idea of stone ruins is mentioned twice. Okay, next paragraph, or next two paragraphs. The first reports to Europeans of Great Zimbabwe were spread 1,000 years ago by Arab traders sailing between the Middle East and the east coast of Africa. The traders told of the fabulous wealth of a mysterious stone city in the African interior. In the traders' tales, the city became associated with the Europeans' understanding of Middle Eastern history. The Queen Sheba, King Solomon and his legendary gold mines, long since lost to the world. By the 16th century, Portuguese explorers regularly visited Africa, searching for King Solomon's gold, but they never found Great Zimbabwe. In 1552, a Portuguese historian, João de Barros, recorded a story told by Arabs about a city with a, quote, square fortress of masonry within and without, built of stones of marvelous size, and there appears to be no mortar adjoining them. In fact, Great Zimbabwe was a marvel. In one area, a massive wall more than 30 feet high and 20 feet thick created a great enclosure. Another area contained a fortress-like series of walls, corridors, and steps built into the bluff that overlooks the ruins. Throughout the city, each stone was precisely fit to the others without the use of mortar. Okay, so first we're going to go over the main idea for paragraph 2, which is the first paragraph on this slide. The main idea that I wrote is, rumors of the Great Zimbabwe made European traders begin exploring East Africa. There are a lot of words, again, in this paragraph and in the next paragraph that I didn't know and that you probably don't know, but the one that I'm going to focus on is mortar because it's repeated in the first paragraph and the second paragraph. We're going to go over that in a second, but before we do, let's just go over the main idea for the third paragraph, which is the second on the slide. I wrote for my main idea, Great Zimbabwe was a really impressive city. Now, before we get to the word mortar and figuring out what it means, we're going to go over which details we're going to underline. So we're using REX, the acronym, as kind of a checklist. For repetition, other than the word mortar, the layout and the size of the city is repeated a couple of times, so I'm going to underline it. But just imagine this fortress, because fortress gives me a nice mental image, and it reminds me to look back at this paragraph because it talks about how the city was built and like the layout. Next, we're going to do cause and effect, the E and C part. So the effect that we see is a lot of European exploration of Africa, specifically in search of the city. The cause of this is that like all the traders' tales and like all the stuff, all the rumors, I guess, that were circulating around this mysterious city and all the gold. So I'm underlining two sentences that represent like, or explain both the cause and the effect that we just talked about. So that right there, the first thing is the traders' tales, and that would be the cause. The effect is the regular exploration. So S, which is the last part of the REX acronym, stands for just statistics, right? There aren't that many statistics because this is a history passage, but I'm going to use it to stand for just numbers in general. So the reason I choose to underline years is in case questions ask me about like the sequence or order of things, having years like underlined really helps place things. Okay, now we're going to go over, let me move, the word mortar. So it's used in two sentences. From reading those sentences, we can tell that it's a noun, which is a person, place, or thing. And I put the two sentences up. The most important thing that we need to figure out once we know that it's a noun is what like the noun does, what's its purpose. And based on those sentences, we can figure out that or we can conclude, I guess, that mortar is something that holds stone together. So the definition that we would come up with based on that is something that holds stone together to build buildings. The official definition is a mixture of lime with cement, sand, and water used in building to bond bricks or stones. So we don't really care whether or not it's made of cement, sand, or water. The purpose, what it does to hold together bricks and stones, is the thing that we actually needed to know. And we were able to figure that out all by ourselves. So that's just an example of how to work backwards and come up with definitions for words that you don't know, but that you need to know. Yeah, and as you can see, it's pretty close to the official definition. So now that you guys know how, you can be very careful when to use it, but it's a very good skill. So now we're going to move on to the next two paragraphs. In the 1870s, Karl Mauch, a German geologist, was the first European to see the Great Zimbabwe, by then in ruins. Mauch realized that he had rediscovered the fabled city from the Debaro story. He jumped to the conclusion that Great Zimbabwe had been built by Queen of Sheba. British authorities sent a British journalist, Richard Hall, to Great Zimbabwe to investigate Mauch's report. Archaeology was still at its infancy, and Hall, convinced that the structures had been built by the ancient people from the Middle East, dug up and discarded the archaeological deposits that would have revealed much about the true history of Great Zimbabwe. Later, European excavations destroyed even more valuable evidence. In the 20th century, after excavating areas that had not been disturbed, David Randall McIver, a Scottish Egyptologist, and Gertrude Caton Thompson, an English archaeologist, concluded that the ruins were unmistakably African in origin. Great Zimbabwe was most likely built during the 14th or 15th century by the ancestors of the present-day Shona people. Recent carbon-14 dating supports their conclusion. Great Zimbabwe was once home to an estimated 20,000 people, the center of a great Shona kingdom. Wealthy Shona kings traded their ivory and gold in coastal towns for other goods, thus accounting for the discovery of beads and other foreign wares in the ruins. Okay, so let's do main ideas. The main idea for the first paragraph I have on the screen, I wrote, European Karl Mauch discovered the city, but there were conflicting stories about who built it. For the second paragraph, I wrote, all scientific evidence supports the theory that the city was part of the Shona kingdom and was built by the Shona people. Now let's move on to underlining and which details to focus on, once again using the acronym REX. So R for repetition. In the second paragraph, a lot of details about the Shona people and the city of Great Zimbabwe are repeated. To make note of that, I'm going to underline the second to last paragraph, or the second to last sentence in the paragraph, because it nicely sums up most of what we learned about the Shona people in that paragraph. Next is cause and effect. In the first paragraph on the slide, the cause was the numerous European excavations, and the effect was a lot of valuable evidence being destroyed. Both the cause and effects are represented in the last sentence of that paragraph. Last but not least, we're going to do statistics. Again, since this is a historical passage, there aren't many statistics in the paragraph, but I'm going to underline the time period again once instead, just to keep track of everything. So let me write, that's all the information. That's the second to last paragraph about the Shona people and Great Zimbabwe, all the information that we learned. That was repetition. Then we have 1870s, which is time period. Then we have cause and effect. Okay. Before we move on to the last paragraph and the main idea, we're going to go over some of the vocabulary from these two paragraphs. Since we already went over a procedure on how to figure out difficult words and we did a couple examples, all I'm going to do is put the words and their definitions on the next slide. What I want you to do is, once the words pop up, pause the video, go back in the text, and try to use the steps that we went over to figure out what they mean and come up with your own definition. And then you're going to come back to the video, resume it, and compare the definition you wrote to the definition that I give you, the official one. It's okay if they're not perfect. This kind of thing takes practice, but it's really important that you guys get some practice time. So the two words are archaeology and excavation. So pause the video now, go back to the text, and come up with your own definitions. The official definition for archaeology is the study of human history and prehistory through the excavation of sites and the analysis of artifacts and other physical remains. That's kind of a wordy definition, but if I had to put it in my own words, I would say archaeology is the study of history through artifacts. It's easy to remember the archaeology artifacts. A good tip for identifying words is anything that ends in ology. That ending, ology, or we could call it a suffix. The suffix ology means the study of. So archaeology is the study of human history through artifacts. Biology is the study of living things. There are lots of other ologies, but that is really just what that suffix or ending means. Now, in the official definition for archaeology, it says the word excavation, which is also a word I asked you guys to come up with a definition for. The official definition for excavation is remove earth carefully and systematically from an area in order to find buried remains. In my words, to dig stuff up. So hopefully you figured out that archaeology is a noun, a person, place, or thing. Excavation, or to excavate, is a verb, and you came up with your own definition. Now we're going to move on to the last little bit of this passage and the main idea, the overall main idea. Okay, so the last little bit of this passage is, one mystery of Great Zimbabwe has been solved. Another mystery remains. Why was the settlement at Great Zimbabwe abandoned, leaving the magnificent stone architecture to fall into ruins? Now, instead of coming up with a main idea for this last little paragraph or trying to underline any of the details, because this isn't really a detail, it's a question, it's kind of a cliffhanger that it leaves us on, I'm just going to come up with a main idea for the whole passage. So my main idea is, and if you want to pause the video now and come up with your own, go ahead, but the main idea I wrote was, the history of Great Zimbabwe, a city now in ruins in southeastern Africa, was a mystery for decades, but recent scientific evidence has proven it to be the remains of a Shona city. Okay, we did it. So today we got through a passage, we underlined important details and talked about an acronym we can use to identify them. We talked about detail questions, and we came up with some sort of procedure to identify vocabulary that we need to come up with definitions for and come up with our own definitions. Remember, guys, the best way to improve your vocabulary is reading. So if you have some more free time, that's a really great way to use it. Yeah, so click the link in the description, try the worksheet, and then watch Alexa's video. Bye. We'll see you next week, and we hope you guys are all doing well.